Okay, so let's start the third lecture right now. Um, and there's no one to go. Okay. So the third lecture is basically dealing with case studies, the projects which are relevant to the topic of this class. Um, I got drawn into case studies so much that I left very little room for discussion of tools, but at the end I'll devote a few minutes to it. So the first project I want you to focus on is Le Corbusier Philips Pavilion, designed for Expo 1958. This was a project which Corbu used to construct electronic poem integrated with architecture. And this poem, I think, has been basically a form of a multimedia show with sound, music, colors, rhythm, and projections integrated with architecture and performative type of experience. The music was composed by Edgar Varèse. It's a very famous modernist composer, and Xenakis, who was his student at the time and disciple. Later he became his competitor. The composition was, in a sense, background for entering and going through the pavilion, and about 800 visitors were able to attend performance, slowly moving through this exhibition space. Because of a succession of those performances, um, it was a kind of walkthrough situation, and pavilion was, in a sense, like walk-through space, and Le Corbusier called it stomach, which kind of digested the visitors and transformed them during the show. You can see the plan, and it is kind of organic in some ways, and it's a little bit like a stomach. And you see the roof plan or view of the basic geometry of the conceptual stage of the project. So this was largely black and white projection of slides and video, at the time probably film, and some color lights as well, and music, and very carefully positioned speakers throughout the space. And it was in a form, it was kind of immersive space, and it was, surprisingly enough, 1958, it was electronically controlled. So the architecture had all those parameters, and you see here the slide of the interior looking up, on which the walls on which projections were made, and you see some of those objects are lights, and some of them are speakers. Here is a control room. This is form of electronic or digital machine which processes sound and time. Everything was script, so the project was basically time, frame by frame, almost. Oh, well, I don't think we'll be able to record very much. I have to speak louder. But anyway, you see on this table there's second by second events listed. So this is 324 second, and this is 314, and this is 316, and so on and so forth. And what happens during this period? All right. Well, another kind of conceptual drawing showing basic geometry and framing. Project, of course, doesn't exist anymore. Shortly after exhibition, it was taken apart, but records of it exist, and there were attempts made about 10 years ago to make to make a computer model with all the, because scripts existed, it was a kind of multimedia experience condition. This I think was done in one of American's design schools. I've seen a clip of it. I don't think it was done as well as we could have done it today, but it's interesting that this exists only in our memory. This is one of the early study models where this idea of the geometry was explored. That's a historical photograph. You can tell the cars are pretty ancient. Architecture is very, very current in many ways. Those hyperbolical surfaces present quite a structural challenge, and this is one of the early tests for the precast panels which were made to secure this geometry, and this is how the project was built. It was set on cables, and cables were stressed, and concrete panels were creating shells, which you've seen before. If we move forward 50 years, we look at the Norman Foster work. It's Smithsonian enclosure of Smithsonian courtyard. I think it's almost exactly 50 years after this event. And construction of the enclosure of the courtyard. And I'll have few illustrations of these projects, which are very telling where the technology was at the time. So this is almost 10 years ago, 9 years ago. So let's look first at the construction. You can see the profiles. If you look at the first image, you understand immediately that no, not from this one. Maybe later you will see that. I should have something later. Yes, okay, well, this will be it. Okay, here we can see actually the geometry. The panels are flat, basically. They are kind of cloaking double curved surface, but they are tetrahedrons and they're flat surfaces, so the difference is taken in a joint. I should have, I missed it. Okay, let me see. No, I don't have that. Okay, maybe I'll have those slides mixed up somewhere, but because I had some construction slides as well, showing the process of erection. It's basically steel frames, and they were, but they were largely both fabricated conventionally, but setup geometry was done, of course, on computer. This was early days. I think Foster was using generative components. It's a Berkeley program, which is kind of predating Grasshopper as a tool. But assembly was pretty conventional, and that's what characterized still a lot of projects today. It's that we use parametric design and algorithmic reasoning to generate the form, to generate the project, but erection of it is frequently done conventionally. This is erection of water cube for Beijing Olympics, and you can see scaffolding. Well, I had a slide where some of the scaffolding was still bamboo, but this looks like steel. But that project, which is familiar, I guess, and I guess there were interesting aspects of this, particularly in terms of ITFE enclosure, which had some kind of characteristics of passive heating during the winter, and the degree it was controlling the heat gain as well in the summer. And this project was pretty interesting when it came out. It's Avi Arap was engineer for that, and that's almost 10 years ago too, when it was designed. Um, I think the way the project is used is somewhat, today is somewhat disturbing. It's not longer sports arena, it's kind of amusement park, or quasi shopping center. It's heavily deteriorated already. And it is speaking of importance of those other aspects of design, which we cannot abdicate our responsibility when we engage in this totally um, groundbreaking geometrical pursuits in this case. Still, maybe materiality of it, I think it is not designed for good maintenance, from what I understood. I haven't seen it, but I had a colleague of mine visited last year, and it is pretty messy in many ways because of a lack of maintenance. And it was not designed, it was redesigned as one-time use. A lot of work related to the parametric design is taking place in academia, and a lot of original work which is coming out is highly experimental, and it's quite legitimate. I think this project was of an interest to me. It came out of AA labs, and the concept of self-organization as a Stigmergy was proposed, and it was to produce complex, seemingly intelligent surfaces with structures without need for any planning, control, or even direct communication between agents in a program. The primary example of this pattern can be seen as termite ecology, which is constructed through indirect, self-organized, and spontaneous coordination structure. This analogy to organic structure has been with us for some time, and I think it is integral part of this subculture. He wrote that from any initial procedure set in place through randomness, emergent dynamic patterns construct architectures of great complexity. Architecture is not product of a set of blueprint or plan, but an evolving structure that correlates local agency within evolving environment. This research project develops its housing-based strategies by creating playpen of multi-agent systems that are programmed through local subsets of dispositional rules. Population-based agency is designed to negotiate the spatial parameters necessary for habitation and circulation. So this, of course, assumes great advancements in 3D printing to change the scale from a small model, which is then used in those collages at a different scale to the real object. However, this experimental work in academia is not without consequence, so certain chances you take with your work could be later seminal. The case studies which I am going through, they are not chronologically arranged. Even I started with a distant past, with Corbu work which is half a century old, and they are not particularly geographically coordinated either. The next project is from Mexico. We can see the project under construction, and I think some of you in this class have this project shown by by Marcin Strzała, who was giving some anecdotal story about process of optimizing the tiles in this building, which involved research group from Gary Technologies. The architect is actually Fernando Romero, and this museum complex is now finished. And 3D modeling, digital modeling has been applied throughout the project and throughout its construction. And you can see the typical, well, you see the sections through envelope, which is multi-layered. I mean, there's a layer of structure and substructure, then secondary purlins, and then tiles. This geometry of the tiles themselves is depicted here. The panels, paneling process is indicated in this left-hand side diagram. Oh, okay, I'm pointing to something and you don't see it, sorry. So it is hexagonal mesh, and middle section of it show the process of stretching the pattern to remove, to optimize the number of units. That's what Strzała was saying, that they had to rationalize the process because it was too complex and too expensive in some ways. So geometry was modified to the point that differences were taken sometimes in a joint. This is in many ways rare yet to have the whole project designed from start to end. I mean, the more common use of parametric software is maybe typified by another project of significance. It's the Young Museum by Herzog de Meuron in San Francisco. This was done 10 years ago. The project building is somewhat formal and conventional as far as galleries go. And so is structure, but the cladding is very original and innovative. You see the curtain perforated steel sheets which wrap the whole project and control the light, and also there was algorithmic procedure used to govern the I guess perforation and govern the pixelation of those panels. You will see it in a minute. I have to go through this material fast, but it will be available for you. The process is described, its logic is described here, and final product here, even though it is curtain steel, so the self-rusting steel, it will look much different today, but complexities of the facade are amazing, of the cladding. So this is a very customized cladding related to the conditions inside, and also attempt to bring some degree of decorum to the flat surface of the enclosure. I have few projects of Toyo Ito to show. Some of them you probably know, so I want to focus on some aspects. This is University of Tokyo University Library for its graduate campus. It's not on the main campus, and the library I think has been widely published. It has been conceived as a series of interlocking arches, if you like, walls. An interesting part of here was the technology was evolved, was developed for very thin concrete walls, which were reinforced. So reinforcing has been very carefully conceived and planned with CAD, and later embedded in a very thin layer of concrete. So this is like egg crate, but it is very spacious project, and it has been totally conceived and built to a large extent with computer and CAD/CAM technology was used for manufacturing of the elements of the wall. This technology he took later to the project which never got built. This is the Berkeley Art Museum. This was, which project looks almost like cardboard. The project was actually, ambitions of the project was to be sustainable and to be LEEDs qualified as almost 100% recyclable. So the walls were out of steel sheet and filled with concrete, and very thin walls in this gallery, in this museum. But they were not complex geometry, so parametric design here was used for not so much for defining the geometry, but for simulating physical conditions of the building. Like the attempts had been made to, great efforts were made to convince the client that this original technology is actually buildable. So fire testing, fireproofing, and fire rating, and different aspects of structural tests and finite element analysis were performed on this project. Here we see tests related to the construction as well. Another of his unbuilt projects, it's a competition which I think he won for Square in Belgium, the music kind of center or forum. And he took the same kind of new very thin membrane wall in form of now in 3D form to develop the project. It was actually very original as this 3D Voronoi pattern. You can see that here is the next diagram. You can see how it worked. I'll have to go through it very fast. And an underlying principle is depicted on here. You can see how it evolved. But the project, which consists of small auditorium and practice room and public space, hasn't been built, and they abandoned this project competition. It was seen as very risky. So it remains as an idea, but this idea he almost at the same time developed and submitted with a different program for the project which got built. This is theater, National Theater in China. He says that when he was designing this competition, winning this competition, the building was surrounded by the farmers' field. So the building is still not yet open. I think end of the year they will hopefully open it. It took 5 to 6 years to build. But of course, other projects, like this Serpentine Pavilion, you probably know it well, was very quickly erected, and it was algorithmically generated concept. Pattern was sort of based on incremental scaling and rotation of series of inscribed squares, and then geometry was folded. Cecil Belmont was a structural engineer working with Toyo Ito. He's a very ingenious guy who did a lot of work on it. This algorithm procedure is described in some of those notes, and even I located the paper. Unfortunately, it's in Italian, which gives an exact description of the process of setting up the design. It was Grasshopper at the time, and it gives a description in detail. But even if you don't know detail, Italian, you probably can get sense out of it from illustrations and translating few captions. I want to show now the work of young studio from New York. Principal of this atelier is Mark Forms, and he does work which borders on art and architecture. What characterizes his work is that he not only conceptualizes the design, but he closely is engaged in fabrication of the projects. So his prototypical structure are sort of uniquely organic environments, and has been quite broadly exhibited and published, among them Pompidou Center and Guggenheim exhibited his work. So between this design research and full-scale prototypes, he claims that architecture provides significant stepping stone for innovation. He explores possibilities of coding and computer protocols for design and fabrications through installation and construction of architectural objects. Prototypical projects are each defined by a single concern, like structure or porosity or just pleasure of experience, and some of them are scalable. I show quickly a few of these projects. This one, he shows direction of the project utilizing sophisticated material because it's carbon fiber. This was made for the interior kind of construction for Louis Vuitton. And another project, this was made out of aluminum, and the interesting part is that the pattern of perforation is also highly customized and related to the structural conditions. He introduced color and different materials to those objects, and they become almost incredible in its kind of formal expression. Of course, one moves very far away from pragmatics and from architecture. Here is a project which he exhibited in Pompidou Center a few years ago, and that got him global attention. This picture shows the tessellation of elements which later are assembled to the singular object. Now, those pursuits are not unique to one particular designer or artist who obviously is obsessed and explores and mines this idea in depth, controlling it very, very well formally, but also as far as act of construction goes. We have here kind of observation from illustrating, I think it is Zaha Hadid project for Venice Biennale 4 years ago. And an article published on it said the architecture witnessed exploratory phase of discovery of possibilities, phases of invention, the use of computer software and physical computing. We have somewhat, this kind of folding technology. This is a unit within Zaha Architect's office. It's called Zaha Code, and they've been exploring not only this particular installation for Biennale, but they've done a number of little projects which I will share with you. The person behind the designer behind it is AA trained Sergey Bouchon, whose work really stands out in many ways. This is a design of a chair designed in a Zaha office. Of course, she was involved in it as well on a conceptual level. I controlled all of her work from her studio, and that was combination both of iterative design and development of the final objects. A lot of work coming out of her studio has been characterized by in-depth engagement of media with a formal agenda. This is her project recently opened in Beijing, next to International Airport, which she described as a welcome and farewell to Beijing. The client representative said that the design meant to evoke image of traditional Chinese symbol of wealth and luck and happiness. And Ahim Menges, whose work we were quoting in the last lecture, wrote about it. The double curvature panels required by architectural design were used as models in software program using Visual Basic operating in Rhino environment, which could subsequently generate flat and single curved panels on an analysis of the local curvature morphology and the original double curved panels. The software-driven panel generation method was used to facilitate rationalization of manufactured sheet metal panels and to comply with higher demands in terms of cost requirements and manufacturing complexity. The project, what he was saying, that the project has been rationalized in order to make it real. So that's a project which has been recognized recently as a best project, high-rise project in China over the last few years. It's awarded. Now I have series of projects coming from her studio, and I want to come back to this slide I showed in one of the previous lectures, which is my slide from Canton, from China, showing certain imperfections in the cladding of the project. Now, if you look at any publications, this is not really indicated or assessed critically. Project is seamless, photographed in a seamless way, and to some extent it is a very grand project. Let me go quickly through it. The two buildings really adjacent to each other in the center of town, housing big opera house and a small black box practice theater. You see the details. And you see the steel structure, flattened out layout for it. And you see rather amazing photographs at night. which are much better than my photograph during the day. When I was putting this lecture together, the news came that she passed away. And this is maybe a moment to recognize her as an exceptional talent, totally self-made designer. And Rem Koolhaas, who was her teacher at AA, he said that, reflecting on her thesis, he said that she was like a moon rocket. She was taking off very, very slowly, and then she took off, and she went on her own. I encountered her when she won the competition for the peak in Hong Kong. This was ritzy club. At this time, she was totally deconstructivist. Without any computing was not part of her agenda. I think even today, to a large extent, Shoemaker and those young people work I showed who work with her were her extension. But this is a project in Hong Kong. This is a project which she did almost straight out of school and won big international competition. It's very beautiful drawings and very beautiful paintings which were used in presentation. Let me go through that very quickly. Yeah, this is more or less site of the project, located at the highest peak of Hong Kong, and this was basically form of the country club for rich people. So there was no agenda, any social agenda here, but the project was standing out among hundreds of projects submitted. It was just standing out, and John Andrews, who was one of the principal jurors, very good Australian architect at the time, had no doubt, like everybody else, that this is exceptional talent. And she proved to be so, because her work, as we keep seeing glimpses, has entered this new age of applying algorithmic procedures to design. And she herself, I don't think she programs in any way, but she's close enough to the process to surround herself with the people who are designers of this new generation. So, few more projects I want to raise now to the end. This is a new airport in Shenzhen, which opened, I think, 2 years ago. It was designed maybe longer, more 4 years ago, but opened 2 years ago. Massimiliano Futsas. And the structure it's basically is covered on both sides by cladding, by tiles. There's 60,000 different elements on a facade and 40,000 different individual unique steel members. So here parametric data model was used to control size and slope of openings, and openings and perforations in this building were also conceived to control daylight and viewing angles and solar gain. This is a huge project. It's like I don't know how many they said, 45 million passengers per year. So it's a huge airport. A few glimpses of construction process. And the final kind of result of this interior space is perforated enclosure. And one more project by large American office, NBBJ. This is a strong design office with many branches throughout the world, but always very design conscious. The paper is published in Acadia Proceedings. This is a story of a design of Fengzhou Tennis Center, which is about to open in a few weeks' time. That's a stadium which primary purpose is tennis, but could be used for other functions as well, and could be seen as a case study in integrated parametric design, as parametric design was used at different scales for different things. So the main goal was to produce a model that is economical in steel quantity and sufficient and energy conscious. Grasshopper was used to generate design for the shell, then it was used to transfer design information to other disciplines to achieve efficient collaboration. Parametric design was applied on many tasks of the projects. It was geometry of design, that's pretty obvious. A series of variations were explored, structural development, conceptual simulations were done, surface analysis and cladding, coordination of documentation, and parametric design for the envelope and closure geometry. Just to look at few of the documents from these projects, you can study in detail, but after defining the geometry project was different alternatives for design and arrangement were explored, and that's, I think, is great potential of parametric design at the conceptual level, not one result, but exploration and examination of alternatives. The process depended on two operations, sorting and transforming. Design alternatives were evaluated and compared by design team according to predefined factors, parameters for shading, aesthetics, drainage, structural performance, and all kinds of other elements of the complex system. Parametric structural model was also parametrically designed, and structural analysis was performed to evaluate it, and final sizing for the model was made as well. Here we have a variation of this exterior envelope, which were explored, and a structural model. I think I had this slide before, or one like it. They used Grasshopper and Kangaroo plugins to visualize loading of a truss and the right and dead loads. Surface analysis was used to finite elements analysis and for the cladding, and algorithm was used to enroll all the surfaces to estimate quantities of the materials. Here are the examples of documentation created using a combination of Grasshopper generated geometry and orthogonal projections made with Revit. So they had Grasshopper and Revit working together. So lesson from this project, a very recent project, is that this methodology is used at the different levels of project development. I want to now, moving to closure, but digital design and fabrication of traditional materials is also interesting kind of niche which is emerging. This is a young Chinese architect, Philip Yan, from Shanghai, who says the significance of traditional materials will be redefined as architects will pay closer attention to their performance characteristics, performative characteristics, and fabrication logic. What is more, the unique geographical features embodied in the traditional materials bring rich regional characteristics into architectural design. Traditional materials have been subjected to experiments to achieve a creative standard in performative tectonics. This is a wall which he did, and the process, the way he did it, there was no robots again, but there were templates which which govern rotation of the cement blocks. So wooden templates were used, and which were, of course, this was all programmed and visualized and planned and perspective, and then govern resolution of this wall you just seen. Here's another of his wall on the left, and on the right is a brick wall done in Zurich at ETH with robots. So here we have a kind of two cultures coexisting. We have those workers in China laying out according to the template by hand those bricks and achieving a very beautiful wall. And here we have a robot laying it out in Zurich, a wall which may be not as beautiful, but certainly it is more ingenious. I have one more project which you wish to look at. This is a project by Toyo Ito, and it is an amazing project. It's a crematorium, a funeral house in Japanese tradition. We recently opened, and it is in this lecture I give link to. You can view in detail this project. It's interesting how he deals with gathering the water and using the water capture in the roof, and how this very thin and elegant membrane marks architecture both outside and inside, and its relation to landscape. There's no time really to dwell on it. So a few words about tools, because I almost totally concentrated on case studies. Something you already know well because you engage Grasshopper. This shows the difference between programming language like Python and Grasshopper, which is using visual programming paradigm, and where you can manipulate logical elements graphically instead textual. It is reducing this common kind of barrier found in learning new language. Of course, Grasshopper is not the only tool available to you. There is one emerging right now called Dynamo by Autodesk, and it's the one to watch. It's increasingly popular. There are also generated components by Bentley. There are many scripting languages in almost every CAD program would have scripting languages. They are not based on visual computing, not always. There's Mel and Maya, quite simple to use, as SDK, InformZ, script in Vectorworks, and RhinoScript as well. So Dynamo is important because it is also a standalone program, and it is going to be, I think it's already connected to Rhino and Maya as well. Now, this problem of different programs and moving from one to another is becoming a global concern. There is a company set up by Google. You can also surf it, and you probably will experience it in practice, called Flux. This Flux is basically a process for collaboration using different platforms for parametric design. So you can use visual programming, but also you can take input from different programs and develop your geometry across the disciplines and across designers. Here you can get data from Dynamo and end up in Grasshopper or reverse. This is an ongoing process which is being right now formulated and developed. Okay, so I think this is about the extent of my talk today. I finish with this slide, which is a view of our stairs and what was hanging over our stairs for a couple of years, which was, I think, designed and built by your predecessors with Bentley generative components, and it is not unlike some of those structures we've seen coming out of New York or Paris today. So I don't think we are far behind, and I think the investment you're making in this culture will profit you, I think, greatly, and your work as well.